The rain started before midnight, the kind that turns the highway into a ribbon of fog and hiss, and leaves the canopy lights over Pump 2 flickering like a dying heartbeat. Mason's shift was always quiet from midnight to 4, a dead zone between long-haul coffee breaks and the first wave of commuters. It was supposed to be boring, the kind of boring that pays the rent and lets a person sleep in daylight without dreams. He liked boring. He hated how the fluorescent bulbs in aisle 3 buzzed when the humidity climbed. He hated how the convex mirror over the snack aisle warped faces into funhouse masks when night drivers wandered in with circles under their eyes. Just before 1, a white panel van rolled up and idled by the dumpsters, where the cameras didn't quite reach. It was normal for trucks to tuck back there to nap, to eat, to wait out weather, but the van never cut its engine. The windows were tinted and the plate was half-masked by mud spatters. Mason watched it through the office window while he counted cigarettes 2s and 10s, until the rows went neat, and right then the phone rang with a hollow sound that always made him think of an empty room. "Highway Services," the voice said. "Card skimmer checks. New advisory. Got a hit from your zip last week. Keep eyes on Pump 2. Thieves like the outer lane." It sounded official enough. The voice had the clipped cadence of someone who spent years telling strangers what to do. Mason jotted down "skimmer check Pump 2 and hung up, breathing in the smell of burnt coffee that had lived in the metal of the pot since before he'd been hired. At 1:17, the bell over the door chirped. A man in a rain poncho came in without looking up, water streaming off the plastic in little rivers. He kept his hood up and moved fast, a circling scan of the candy racks, then a detour to the bathroom key. "Back in a sec," the man said, not waiting for a reply. The bathroom key was on a plank of wood with "Do Not Copy" burned into it, heavy enough to be a weapon. Mason watched the bathroom door close in the convex mirror and saw only his own face, widened and odd, staring back. Minutes stretched. The van by the dumpsters never moved. The bathroom door opened and closed, with the quiet click of a careful hand, and the key clacked back onto the counter, damp and cold. "Thanks," the man said from inside the poncho, head still down. Then motion, the bell again, the door yawning briefly to the hiss of rain, and he was gone. The floor by the bathroom was wet, with prints shaped like half moons. Mason fetched the yellow mop sign and wiped them away, irritated at the extra task, grateful for something to do. At 1:40, the camera over aisle 3 glitched. It did that on humid nights. A line tore across the screen and rolled itself into snow. Mason tapped the monitor box, and the snow shrank to a jitter in the corner. Just as it settled, something shifted in the ceiling tile above the office door. It was nothing, he told himself, just ductwork reacting to the cold air kicking on. The ceiling was a patchwork of panels that weighed almost nothing and moved if a person coughed too hard. He looked away. The fluorescent bulbs hummed louder. The rain thickened. At 1:53, the chime at Pump 2 dinged twice, as if someone had lifted the nozzle and put it back without paying. The register screen popped a window. Authorization request. The deck was empty when he leaned to see the mystic curtain between the pumps and the road. The phone rang again. Same hollow, same voice. "Seeing any anomalies at Pump 2? Someone lifted and replaced the handle," Mason said, hating how his voice felt too loud in the cube of the office. "No sale. Copy," the voice said, not really listening. "You got a hatch above the office?" Mason's eyes flicked up before he could stop them. "Yeah, maintenance crawl. Lock the bathroom door," the voice said. "Make sure it's deadbolted. Then step outside, count to 30, and come back in. Just checking if the lock sensors report." The request was dull enough to be real. He pocketed the bathroom key plank, turned the bolt, and stepped outside into the hiss and pulse of the canopy lights. The night pressed on his ears. He counted raindrips on the curb. He realized halfway through counting that he'd left the door to the store propped with a kick wedge, the wedge that kept him from getting locked out. From the street, the lit rectangle of the counter looked like a stage set. Inside, the office door was just visible, the rectangle under the hatch. The ceiling tile moved. It didn't lift. It flexed, as if someone pressed a palm against it from above and let go. The wedge bucked. The main door drifted on its spring, and the alarm in Mason's chest, old, animal, rising like heat, went finally fully on. He let the door shut. He didn't go inside. He didn't pretend to fix a sensor. He stood with his back to the window, rain filling the hood of his jacket, and dialed 911 with fingers that didn't feel like his. "Take your time," the operator said. "Tell me exactly what's happening." He told it like inventory, stripped of feeling, like counting 2s and 10s. White van, poncho man, bathroom, the hatch, the pump ding, the voice that told him to go outside. The operator asked if anyone else was in the store. He said no. She asked if there was a safe room. He said the walk-in cooler had an inside latch. She told him to go around to the back, stay low along the building's wall to avoid the front windows, and slip in through the stockroom door if it was unlocked. It was. He moved slow. The stockroom was cold and smelled like motor oil and old cardboard. From there, a person could see the office through the wire window in the door. Mason crouched and peered. A ceiling tile hung at an angle. Fingers, pale and wet, curled over the edge, and then a face appeared upside down, hovering, turning slowly like a lantern on a rope. It wasn't the face of a monster. It was a man in his 30s with damp hair, a cheap headlamp, and a jaw clenched tight around a screwdriver. He listened to the store in a way that made Mason think of animals at the tree line. Then he slid back up, cat quiet, and the tile went flat. The hallway to the cooler felt a mile long. Mason moved like a shadow, slow, deliberate, forcing his breath to stay in. Inside the cooler, the world became metal and white light, and the dusty smell of unwashed soda bottles. The latch slid into place with a sound that was louder than thunder. He crouched between crates of water and a stack of expired cupcakes and held the phone like a relic. The operator told him officers were 3 minutes out. 3 minutes was forever. 3 minutes was maybe enough time to unscrew the grate over the cooler's ceiling vent. Something knocked the office chair over. The office door opened. Boots whispered on tile. A person could learn the geography of a place by sound. The rubber mat by the fountain drinks, the grit by the door, the hollow slap in the aisle where the tile had a crack. The footsteps paused by the bathroom. The knob clicked. The bolt held. The footsteps came toward the cooler hallway and stopped. There was a listening silence. Then, metal scraped. Something slid across the handle outside the cooler door. A squeegee pole, maybe. Wedged through the grip to jam it closed. The headlamp beam flashed through the cooler window for a split second. A dull oval of light that found nothing interesting and moved on. The beam hung longer on the office door, on the register, on the monitors. The hallway swallowed the footsteps again. The building hummed like a living thing. Somewhere far away, sirens braided with rain. Later, after the sheriffs had pulled the ceiling down and dragged a man from the crawlspace with his jacket torn and his face red with thermal dust, after they'd found the screwdriver marks around the hatch. The coiled rope, the snack wrappers pressed flat into insulation, the statements and clipboard questions began. The man had come in at 11:52, wearing the poncho. He had taken the bathroom key and opened the drop ceiling above the toilet, climbed up, and snaked through the space to the office hatch. He had watched while Mason counted cigarettes and wiped away his own footprints. The van was stolen. The phone call had been a spoof. Could have gone another way, the deputy said at dawn, hands on hips, looking up into the ripped open ceiling. Sometimes they wait hours. The ceiling was a mouth without teeth. The store felt new, and wrong with its innards exposed. Every night after, long after the holes were patched, and the hatch was fitted with a lock that needed 2 hands and a code, Mason would hear the lightest touch overhead whenever the air kicked on. He'd tilt his head and listen, and the building would listen back. And from then on, he liked boring less. He liked bolts and latches and lists more. He learned the weight of every tile by heart.
This story takes place near a remote cabin at the edge of the Black Pine Forest.
The cabin at Black Pine wasn't remote in the way maps suggest. Just 3 miles off the county road down a washboard track that ate tires and hid service bars. But it felt like the world thinned out there, until only timber and weather were left to talk back. Arya took it because the rate was cheap and the week was quiet, a gap between edits where recording clean forest beds would pad the sound library she'd been building for years. A ranger neighbor had said the place used to be a research outpost before funding dried up, which explained the metal conduit along the rafters and the rusted brackets where monitoring gear had hung. By dusk on day 2, she'd set 4 passive mics outside, and a tripwire of bottle caps on fishing line across the back steps. More for her nerves than for any real security, the generator coughed once after dark and settled into its temperamental purr, the sound becoming a blanket against the bigger quiet that lived in the trees. Rain came in a patient, soaking fall, moving in sheets that turned the yard into a gray mouth, and the only light beyond the windows was the red blink of a trail cam aimed down the access path. Arya made notes with the meticulousness that paid her rent. Mic positions, humidity, wind direction, timestamps, battery rotations, a little grid of order taped to the fridge, beside the evacuation plan and the ranger's emergency number. The phone had signal if she stood by the sink and leaned her shoulder into the window frame. She sent a pin to a friend's and promised to call at noon if weather allowed. The first knock came at 1:11 a.m. 2 gentle taps on the kitchen window, like a polite guest, had found their way to the wrong door and didn't want to wake the house. She froze with the mug halfway up. The clink of ceramic on tooth, loud enough to feel reckless. For a second she thought it was the generator coughing again in some new register. Then the trail cam blinked once, twice, and went dark. Not like it fired a shot, but like someone's shadow had eaten the little cone of infrared. Arya set the mug down and killed the inside lights, standing until the cabin's reflections drained from the glass, and the outside could look in. She told herself wind does things and called up the trail cam phone app, waiting on the lazy handshakes of weak radio to bring thumbnails into being. The last frame before the blink was empty path and rain. As ordinary as anything, the next frame never arrived. She flipped the deadbolt on the kitchen door and checked the back, running fingers along the bottle cap line, finding the tension the way a guitarist tests a string. Her breath fogged the glass, and in it she wrote reflexively an X with her fingertip, then wiped it away with the back of her sleeve, as if an X could be read by something that waited. At 1:24 a.m., her phone chimed a Bluetooth pairing request from a device named Brick, a cheap speaker's default name she'd seen 100 times in urban coffee shops, but never 3 miles down a logging road. The request fired again when she rejected it, stubborn as a child, then stopped, leaving only the generator purr in the wet hush of the yard. Arya killed the generator, and the silence came down like a lid, her ears filling with cabin sounds. She'd already cataloged the tick of cooling metal, the sigh of the chimney, the soft click that came every 6 minutes from the old thermostat. In that new, heavy quiet, she heard footsteps on wet wood, a slow, careful wait on the back steps where the bottle cap should sing. They didn't sing. She put her palm to the wall as if the cabin could tell her what it knew, and felt the faintest thread of vibration at each careful step. Her hand slid down to the latch and held there, the metal greasy with years, and she pictured the back door from the outside peeling paint, soft wood, a lock plate held by screws that had bit and rebit into the same holes forever. A face appeared in the reflection she had just wiped. Not a face really, but the suggestion of one. The way 2 raindrops can make eyes if a person needs them to, and she backed away until the table edge found her hip. The knock came again, not at the kitchen, but at the bedroom window across the cabin. Same polite rhythm, knuckle light, as if someone tried to be heard by the person inside, without waking whatever else might be listening outside. Arya's mind did inventory, uselessly efficient. There is 1 road in, 1 road out, and a single porch light that now throws no light because it is unplugged from the generator. There are 4 mics out there with LED tells that could be seen if a person stood 6 feet away and waited for the next blink cycle. And there is a trail cam that has gone from operator to subject. There is a Bluetooth speaker named like a brick that wants to pair, which means it's close enough to talk to a phone that can barely call town from the sink. A voice came through the wall then, a whisper-soft playback of her own field notes from earlier, the phrasing exact, and the ambient hiss of the yard wrapped around it like gauze. Mike B, southwest corner by the stump, windshield adjusted 15 feet from path. The words were wrong by being perfectly hers, accorded to the little backup chain she kept running habitually, now cut and looped by hands that knew how to make sound into a key. The clip played twice and stopped, and a third knock at the bedroom window replaced it. The rhythm slower now, patient in a way that made patience a blade. Arya slid the heavy dresser against the bedroom door and dragged the mattress to angle the line of sight the way instructors told people to do in classes she'd taken because it felt like control. Her satellite messenger lived in her camera bag. She thumbed it awake and watched the little screen argue with low clouds. The progress bar inching a breadcrumb of hope toward whichever tower or bird still cared. She typed, "Someone outside cabin," mimicking my voice. Trail cam down. No car visible from window. Then added the coordinates printed on the ranger's emergency card, because she knew better than to trust pins and rain. The bar finished and the messenger chirped, and she allowed herself one lungful that felt less like drowning. Outside, the speaker named Brick tried to pair again and then acquiesced, withdrawing into the yard where all devices eventually sleep. 20 minutes is elastic in fear, but she counted it anyway, watching the numbers on the stove clock swell and roll, and wondering if the power reserve in its mind would die at an inopportune now. The bottle caps finally rang, not because someone stepped on them, but because a raccoon or a boot or a branch snagged the line and made music by accident. A bright tin alarm that revealed a thing trying not to reveal itself. A shape moved between trunks, black on blacker, geometry where there shouldn't be any, and she snapped one flash photo through the gap in the dresser, the white burn of it painting after images on her sight. When her eyes came back, the yard was only rain. By the time tires sounded on the access path, slow in respect, lights off in the last 20 yards as if the forest were a church, Arya had stacked her life by the door in neat piles that fit in 2 trips and told herself not to think of the third thing that always gets left. 2 deputies and the ranger neighbor came in quietly, doing that professional glance at corners and hands that said they had learned to see without staring. And the first thing one of them did was touch the bottle cap line and nod to the others, like Arya had passed some unspoken test. They found the speaker under the crawl of the porch, rain-beaten and cheap, wired to a tiny power bank taped in a baggie. And they found her spare audio recorder in the pine duff 20 feet off the steps where someone had gone flat to avoid the trail cam that still blinked and recorded nothing. They found prints that were neither barefoot nor Jiso. Boot-socked, the ranger said, because socks leave a suggestion more than a shape, and the suggestion walked a slow arc around the cabin and back to the logging road where tread marks waited. Morning showed the trail cam's last real frame, a shoulder of a jacket at the edge of the cone, and the exact pattern of ripstop she had glimpsed, reflected when she turned her kitchen into a mirror for fear. The ranger said sometimes people learn a place the way a deer learns a fence line, by testing it every season until the gap stops shocking. Sometimes those people buy speakers and wait for rain and make patience a blade. No one promised a name or a face, only that a patrol would swing the road more often, that motion lights would be better than mirrors, that the cabin's soft door would be replaced by one that drank screws like meat. Arya took her mics down with hands that had remembered their work in the night, and found she couldn't unhear the politeness of those knocks, the way danger had asked permission before it tried the handle. The week was not over, the calendar said, but the cabin felt finished. Its quiet now crowded with what it had been willing to hold, and she wrote in her notebook a line she would not use on any project. Do not mistake the absence of noise for safety, only for rehearsal. On the way out, she saw sock prints on the logging road, already fading under the new rain, and told herself that was a kind of mercy. The highway narrowed from 4 lanes to 2 just past mile 247, where floodlights from a bridge project ended, and the dark began again, like a door closing behind a person who thought they were alone. Nikhil had been driving since sunset, with coffee that tasted like pennies and a rental sedan, whose dashboard glow made the cabin feel like an aquarium, bright inside and black infinite outside. Rain stitched the windshield in tight diagonals, and the wipers laid down brief, deceptive clarity that vanished before his eyes could use it. The GPS blue line floated over a map that showed nothing but blank county and a few gray roads that went nowhere. Then the screen blinked, rerouting as if the car had startled itself. He passed a car on the shoulder, with hazards going rhythmically slow, a metronome for nerves, and watched it shrink in the mirror until the red blink looked like a distant tower light. 5 miles later, it appeared again, ahead. Same model, same dented rear quarter, same slow, patient blink parked under a green sign that announced 247 inches numbers that reflected rain like wet eyes. The mind does inventory at night, he told himself, and it finds patterns because patterns make fear feel like math instead of weather. He eased off the gas a fraction and felt the car float, that lightness that means tires are thinking about water more than asphalt, then settled back into the lane as if nothing had thought at all. The radio had lost stations 30 minutes back and offered only an evangelist fading in and out like a ghost running a dimmer switch, and Nikhil turned it down to hear the road's own voice better. That was why the tapping was clear when it started. A sharp tick-tick from the rear passenger side that sounded exactly like a small rock caught in the tread, except it kept perfect time with the hazard blink of the car he had passed twice. He accelerated to test it, and the tick sped up obediently, then slowed when he did, which should have reassured him, but didn't. At 247, again, a senseless loop. He thought, except highways can loop people without moving the road. His tire pressure light chimed and went yellow. He took the next exit, a corkscrew down to a frontage road that ran between black fields and a single gas station that looked closed even though the canopy lights were on. The store window was a mirror that kept the inside to itself, and the air pump sat like a small robot under the canopy, screen fogged, card reader blinking a sullen green. Nikhil eased beside it and stepped out into rain that felt colder than it had any right to be in late summer. The kind of cold that lives in concrete and comes up through shoes. Rear passenger tire, soft but not flat. A slow sigh rather than a scream. Sidewall clean, tread pebbled with grit. One small silver head of a drywall screw winking between grooves like a bad coin. He fished the rental packet for the inflator kit, and remembered too late that the trunk space was a different geometry in this model, the latch hidden under a lip that made fingers feel clumsy. The station door opened then with a little chime that felt out of place in a place with no people, and a man in a hooded rain jacket stepped halfway out and raised one hand the way strangers do when they want to look helpful without committing to words. "Airs on the house," the man said, voice neutral, the accent from nowhere in particular, and ducked back inside as if warmth were a species that might escape. Nikhil swiped anyway out of habit, watched the blinking green go steady, and listened to the compressor wake with a tired growl. As air went in, the tick-tick synchronized again with something unseen, and he looked across the highway and saw a pair of hazard lights wink on in the far lot where trucks sometimes idle, as if a driver had returned and left again in the span of a breath. "Patch kit?" he asked through the prop door, not stepping over the threshold, and the man held up a hand like a stop sign and said, "Not tonight, friend. The roads are eating nails since the bridge work started." The sentence was ordinary and wrong at once, like a familiar melody played a half step off, and Nikhil took the inflator hose from the valve and capped it with fingers he had to tell to be gentle. The pressure light blinked off on the dash, then on again, yellow to red this time, and the tires settled visibly, the rubber seeming to relax into the idea of surrender. "Spare?" the man asked, still half inside, and Nikhil nodded because there had to be one, because rental contracts implied as much, like a prayer. He popped the trunk and lifted the false floor, and there it was. A donut spare with a tiny admonition stamped on its face about distance and speed and secrets, next to a jack that looked new in the way tools look when no one has had to trust them. Rain made everything slippery, and he found himself bracing a knee against the bumper to steady the wrench on the lug, the night making balance a calculation rather than a reflex. Halfway through, another car rolled in under the canopy and idled with its lights off, windshield gleaming black, and stayed there like a thought someone didn't finish. The man in the doorway watched the new arrival over Nikhil's shoulder and said, "You're quick," which sounded like praise but sat in the gut like a warning. Nikhil got the donut on, lowered the car, and felt that odd moment when weight transfers in the sedan decided to be a different animal than the one that arrived. The other car's driver door cracked open an inch and closed again, nobody getting out, just that little release of interior light that proved a person existed in there somewhere. Nikhil slid behind the wheel and locked the doors, because that's what hands do when minds are busy pretending they aren't afraid. He pulled back onto the frontage road, taking the long loop to the on-ramp, and checked the mirror because empty glass behind is a kind of drug on nights like this. The other car rolled out 2 beats later and merged behind with its lights still off. A shadow practicing being a car, or a car practicing being a shadow, and kept a distance that could be called courteous if the night were kinder. On the ramp, he accelerated, until the donut began to hum the way donuts do at speeds they hate, and he backed off to keep it from singing too loud. The car behind let the gap grow, then draw back in, a tide without moon, and Nikhil set the cruise not because it helped, but because it made his feet feel less responsible for outcomes. At mile 247, again impossible, he told himself. But the sign didn't care. Someone had dragged an orange construction barrel into the right lane and laid it on its side, a bright, wet obstacle that looked like a toy until the last second. He swerved left, the donut complaining, and saw in the mirror that the car behind picked the barrel up mid-roll with its front end and rode it a few yards like a lion does a kill before letting it go. The barrel bounced into the median and settled. The other car's lights came on finally, low beams that made the road look honest again for a heartbeat. Then they clicked off, and the car drifted back to that courteous distance that was not a kindness. The next exit sign didn't say a town, only a number, and the word service. And he took it because a word like that means different things in daylight, and he needed the daylight meaning. The ramp spit him onto a short loop that ended in a cluster of buildings with metal shutters and one lit window that revealed a vending machine and a bulletin board with flyers whose corners curled like old leaves. He parked under the single working light and watched the mirror fill with nothing for a count of 30 that felt like 30 rehearsals for panic, then another 30 for performance. The other car never appeared, and the night suddenly felt as empty as it had been pretending not to be. In the vending machine's reflection, he saw the rental's rear seat and the thing he had not let himself look at before. A dark smear on the passenger side headrest, where his hair had not touched, and a tiny crescent of glass on the floor mat that didn't come from his day. He checked the rear door and found the child lock engaged on a car with no children, and the driver's side rear seatbelt was pulled all the way out and locked, as if it had been pinned across a body that didn't want to sit still. The rental agreement in the glove box had a return noted from a town 2 counties over with a date from 2 days ago, and the pen impression beneath it made a name that had been pressed too hard and then scribbled out. Behind the bulletin board glass, a sheet with a sheriff's badge asked for information about a white sedan used in roadside incidents along the construction corridor, last seen near a station at the 247 exit. He stood there and let the rain decide how wet he should be, and listened for an engine that did not come, then thumbed the number on the flyer and read the plate aloud from his trunk, as if speaking the characters could make them less his. The dispatcher told him to stay under the light and wait for a unit to roll by. And he stayed because suddenly the donut's warning felt like wisdom rather than nuisance. When the cruiser arrived, its light bar off like a courtesy, the deputy looked at the rental, then the smear on the headrest, then the way Nikhil held his shoulders like a person bracing for a wave. "Good to stop," the deputy said softly, as if loud would break something, and turned his shoulder to the wind so the radio could hear better when it asked for the 5th time whether anyone was in the car with him. The highway kept going, as highways do, pretending not to remember what they see, and behind them somewhere, as the barrel lay on its side, like a bright punctuation mark, at the end of a sentence no one wanted to read again. Nikhil watched the cruiser in the mirror on the ride back to the station, and decided that sometimes the scariest thing isn't being followed, but finally pulling into a pool of light and learning what has been in the car the entire time.